Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I bought alien DNA from the dark web. The next day, my sister was pregnant. I've always been a sucker for weird stuff. You know, the kind of guy who goes down YouTube rabbit holes about conspiracy theories and alien abductions. It started as a hobby, but I think it turned into an obsession. Anyway, it's important you understand why I did what I did. It wasn't just boredom. It was a deep, gnawing curiosity that led me to the darkest corners of the internet. So there I was on a Tuesday night, scrolling through the dark web out of sheer curiosity. I'd been on there before, mostly looking at the bizarre and creepy things people were selling, but never with the intent to buy anything. This time though, I stumbled upon a listing that caught my eye. Authentic alien DNA, limited supply. I laughed at first, thinking it was just another scam, but then I started reading the description. The seller claimed that the DNA was extracted from an alien body recovered from the Roswell crash. They had all these crazy details about the recovery mission, the scientific experiments, and how they managed to keep it all under wraps for decades. It was all so detailed and well written that it almost seemed legit. Almost. I don't know what came over me, but I decided to buy it. Maybe it was the few beers I had earlier, or maybe it was just the thrill of doing something so outrageous. I didn't expect much to come of it. I thought at worst I'd get some random vial of green liquid that was probably just food coloring and water. The package arrived the next day. I was surprised by how fast it came. It was a small, unmarked box with no return address. Inside was a tiny vial of clear liquid and a handwritten note that read, "Use with caution." There were no instructions, no information about what to do with it. Just those 3 words. I put the vial in my desk drawer and tried to forget about it. I know, it sounds stupid. Why buy something like that if you're just going to ignore it? But as the days went by, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started having these weird dreams about aliens and experiments, and every time I woke up, I felt this overwhelming urge to use the DNA. One night, after a particularly vivid dream, I decided to take the vial out and look at it again. I sat at my desk, turning the vial over in my hands, trying to decide what to do. I thought about drinking it, injecting it, even just opening it to see if it smelled like anything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Then my sister came in. She's a year younger than me, and we've always been close. She saw the vial and asked me what it was. I told her it was nothing, just some stupid thing I bought online, but she wouldn't let it go. She kept asking me questions until I finally caved and told her the whole story. She laughed, of course. She thought it was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. But then she got this weird look in her eyes. She asked if she could hold the vial. And before I could say anything, she opened it. I yelled at her to stop, but it was too late. She had already dipped her finger into the liquid and put it in her mouth. I freaked out. I didn't know what was going to happen. I told her she was an idiot and that she should go to the hospital, but she just laughed and said she felt fine. She went back to her room, and I sat there staring at the empty vial, wondering what the hell I had done. The next day, everything seemed normal. My sister was her usual self, no weird symptoms or anything. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was just water or some harmless chemical. But that night, things took a turn for the worse. I woke up to the sound of my sister screaming. I ran to her room and found her curled up in a ball on her bed, clutching her stomach and crying. She kept saying something was moving inside her. I thought maybe she was just having a bad dream or something, but then I saw it. Her stomach was bulging, like something was trying to push its way out. I called 911, but by the time the paramedics arrived, my sister was unconscious. They rushed her to the hospital, and I followed in my car, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What had I done? What was happening to my sister? At the hospital, they ran a bunch of tests, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong. They said she was pregnant, which was impossible because she hadn't been with anyone in months. But the ultrasound showed something inside her, something that didn't look human. They kept her overnight for observation, and I went home, feeling completely helpless. I couldn't stop thinking about the vial and the note that came with it. Use with caution. I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat in my room, staring at the empty vial, wondering what kind of nightmare I had unleashed. And then, just as the sun was starting to rise, I got a call from the hospital. My sister was gone. She had disappeared from her room in the middle of the night, leaving behind nothing but a trail of blood and a single cryptic message written on the wall in what looked like her own blood. It's inside me. After my sister disappeared, my life became a blur of panic and dread. The police launched a full-scale search, but they didn't have any leads. They questioned me for hours, asking about the vial and what I knew about it. I told them everything, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was hiding something. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of my sister. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, twisted in pain, and that message on the wall. It's inside me. What the hell did that mean? What was inside her? One night, I was sitting in my living room, surrounded by news clippings and police reports, when I heard a noise outside. I thought it was just the wind or an animal, but then I heard it again, a soft scratching sound, like nails on a window. My heart started pounding. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the window. There, standing in the yard, was my sister. She looked different though. Her skin was pale and her eyes had this wild, haunted look. Her hair was tangled and dirty, and she was wearing the same hospital gown from the night she disappeared. I rushed outside, calling her name, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at me. When I got closer, I saw that her stomach was still swollen, even more than before. It looked like she was 9 months pregnant, but it was all wrong. The shape was off, too jagged and uneven. I reached out to touch her, but she recoiled, letting out a low, guttural growl. That's when I noticed her hands. Her nails had grown long and sharp, and there was something dark and sticky under them. Blood. She finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's inside me," she repeated, her eyes wide with fear. "You have to help me." I didn't know what to do. I tried to get her to come inside, but she shook her head violently. "No hospitals," she said. "They can't help me. You have to do it." I asked her what she meant, but she just kept repeating the same thing. "It's inside me. You have to help me." Finally, she pointed to the shed at the back of our yard. I nodded and led her there, my mind racing with a million questions. Inside the shed, I turned on the light and helped her sit down on an old mattress. She was shaking, and her breathing was shallow. I asked her what was inside her, but she just shook her head and started to cry. "It hurts," she said. "It's moving." I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. I thought about calling an ambulance, but she was adamant about not going to the hospital. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the workbench and knelt beside her. "I don't know what to do," I said, my voice trembling. She grabbed my hand and looked me in the eyes. "You have to cut it out," she said. I froze. "I can't do that," I said. "I don't know how. I could hurt you." She squeezed my hand harder. "Please," she said. "It's the only way." I took a deep breath and nodded. I didn't have any other options. I grabbed a bottle of rubbing alcohol and some rags, trying to sterilize the scissors as best I could. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I told her to lie back and try to stay still. She bit down on a piece of wood and nodded. I made the first cut, and she screamed. Blood poured out, and I almost passed out from the sight of it. But I kept going, making small incisions around the bulge in her stomach. She was thrashing and moaning, and I was terrified I was going to kill her. But then, something moved under her skin, something that wasn't human. I felt my stomach turn, but I forced myself to keep going. I cut deeper, and finally, I saw it. A dark, slimy shape, wriggling inside her. It looked like a cross between a snake and an insect, with long, spindly legs and a segmented body. I reached in with my hands and grabbed it, pulling it out as gently as I could. My sister let out a blood-curdling scream as the creature came free. It thrashed in my hands, its legs clawing at my skin. I threw it to the ground and stomped on it, crushing it under my boot. Blood and slime splattered everywhere, and the creature let out a high-pitched squeal before it finally stopped moving. I turned back to my sister, but she was unconscious, her breathing shallow. I wrapped her in blankets and cleaned the wound as best I could, praying that she would survive. I didn't know what else to do. I stayed with her all night, watching over her and waiting for her to wake up. As the sun rose, she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Is it gone?" she asked, her voice weak. I nodded. "It's gone," I said. "You're safe now." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever that thing was, it was just the beginning. And I had no idea what was coming next. After that night in the shed, I thought things would get better. I thought my sister would recover, and we could figure out what to do next. But I was wrong. Things only got worse. For the first few days, she seemed to be getting better. The wound was healing, and she was starting to eat and talk again. But then the nightmare started. She'd wake up screaming, saying she could feel something crawling under her skin. I tried to reassure her, tell her it was just the trauma messing with her mind, but I wasn't so sure myself. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Then there were the changes, subtle at first, but they became more pronounced over time. Her eyes, once bright and full of life, took on a dull, almost vacant look. Her skin grew paler, and she started to lose weight rapidly. She'd spend hours staring at nothing, her body twitching occasionally, like she was being shocked by some invisible force. One night, I woke up to find her standing over my bed, her eyes wide and unblinking. She didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me. I called her name, but she didn't respond. Finally, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me shaken and unable to sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I found strange symbols carved into the walls of the shed. They looked like a cross between ancient runes and alien hieroglyphs. I had no idea what they meant, but I could tell they weren't something my sister could have come up with on her own. I tried asking her about them, but she just looked at me blankly, like she didn't understand the question. Things reached a breaking point a few nights later. I woke up to the sound of muffled sobbing coming from her room. I rushed in and found her sitting on the floor, clutching her stomach and rocking back and forth. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "It's happening again," she whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She lifted her shirt, and I saw the bulge was back. It was smaller this time, but it was there, moving under her skin. "I can feel it," she said, her voice trembling. "It's inside me again." I didn't know what to do. I felt completely helpless. But then she grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have to get it out," she said. I shook my head. "I can't," I said. "Not again. We need to get you to a hospital." She shook her head violently. "No hospitals," she said. "They can't help me. You have to do it. Please." I didn't have a choice. I grabbed the scissors and the rubbing alcohol, and we went back to the shed. She lay down on the mattress, and I prepared to cut her open again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the scissors, but I had to do it. I had to help her. I made the first cut, and she screamed, but I kept going. Blood poured out, and I almost passed out from the sight of it. But then, something moved under her skin, something that wasn't human. I cut deeper, and finally, I saw it. Another dark, slimy shape, wriggling inside her. It looked different this time, bigger, more developed. I reached in and grabbed it, pulling it out as gently as I could. My sister let out a blood-curdling scream as the creature came free. It thrashed in my hands, its legs clawing at my skin. I threw it to the ground and stomped on it, crushing it under my boot. Blood and slime splattered everywhere, and the creature let out a high-pitched squeal before it finally stopped moving. I turned back to my sister, but she was unconscious, her breathing shallow. I wrapped her in blankets and cleaned the wound as best I could, praying that she would survive. I didn't know what else to do. I stayed with her all night, watching over her and waiting for her to wake up. As the sun rose, she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Is it gone?" she asked, her voice weak. I nodded. "It's gone," I said. "You're safe now." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever that thing was, it was just the beginning, and I had no idea what was coming next. In the days that followed, the changes in my sister became more pronounced. She started to develop strange abilities. She could move things with her mind, make objects float in the air. At first, it seemed like a gift, but then it became clear that it was something far more sinister. One night, I found her standing in the middle of the living room, her eyes glowing a faint green. She was chanting in a language I didn't understand, and the air around her was crackling with energy. I tried to snap her out of it, but she didn't respond. Finally, she collapsed to the floor, exhausted and terrified. "I can't control it," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's taking over." I didn't know what to do. I felt completely helpless. I thought about calling for help, but I didn't know who to trust. The police didn't believe me, and the hospitals couldn't help her. I was on my own. Then one night, she disappeared again. I woke up to find her bed empty and the front door wide open. I searched the house, the yard, the entire neighborhood, but she was nowhere to be found. I called the police, but they didn't have any leads. It was like she had vanished into thin air. I spent the next few days in a daze, barely able to function. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. All I could think about was my sister and what had happened to her. Then one night, I heard a noise outside. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the window. There, standing in the yard, was my sister. She looked different though. Her skin was even paler, almost translucent, and her eyes had that same wild, haunted look. Her hair was tangled and dirty, and she was wearing the same hospital gown from the night she disappeared. I rushed outside, calling her name, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at me. When I got closer, I saw that her stomach was swollen again, even more than before. It looked like she was 9 months pregnant, but it was all wrong. The shape was off, too jagged and uneven. I reached out to touch her, but she recoiled, letting out a low, guttural growl. That's when I noticed her hands. Her nails had grown long and sharp, and there was something dark and sticky under them. Blood. She finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "It's inside me," she repeated, her eyes wide with fear. "You have to help me." I didn't know what to do. I tried to get her to come inside, but she shook her head violently. "No hospitals," she said. "They can't help me. You have to do it." I asked her what she meant, but she just kept repeating the same thing. "It's inside me. You have to help me." Finally, she pointed to the shed. At the back of our yard, I nodded and led her there, my mind racing with a million questions. Inside the shed, I turned on the light and helped her sit down on an old mattress. She was shaking, and her breathing was shallow. I asked her what was inside her, but she just shook her head and started to cry. "It hurts," she said. "It's moving." I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. I thought about calling an ambulance, but she was adamant about not going to the hospital. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the workbench and knelt beside her. "I don't know what to do," I said, my voice trembling. She grabbed my hand and looked me in the eyes. "You have to cut it out," she said. I froze. "I can't do that," I said. "I don't know how. I could hurt you." She squeezed my hand harder. "Please," she said. "It's the only way." I took a deep breath and nodded. I didn't have any other options. I grabbed the scissors and the rubbing alcohol, and we went back to the shed. She lay down on the mattress, and I prepared to cut her open again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the scissors, but I had to do it. I had to help her. I made the first cut, and she screamed, but I kept going. Blood poured out, and I almost passed out from the sight of it. But then, something moved under her skin, something that wasn't human. I cut deeper, and finally, I saw it. Another dark, slimy shape wriggling inside her. It looked different this time, bigger, more developed. I reached in and grabbed it, pulling it out as gently as I could. My sister let out a blood-curdling scream as the creature came free. It thrashed in my hands, its legs clawing at my skin. I threw it to the ground and stomped on it, crushing it under my boot. My sister's disappearance, the second time, plunged me into a new level of despair. The police, already skeptical of my earlier stories, started treating me like a suspect. They questioned me relentlessly, scrutinizing every detail of my life. But they found nothing. I was innocent, but I was also alone. Alone and terrified. I didn't know where to turn, so I started researching the symbols I had found in the shed. I spent hours on obscure forums and shady websites, trying to make sense of what was happening. I stumbled upon a community of people who believed in extraterrestrial phenomena and conspiracies. Some of their theories were too outlandish to take seriously, but one thread caught my attention. It was about alien DNA and its potential effects on humans. The posts described experiments similar to what I'd experienced with my sister. They talked about alien entities using human hosts to incubate their offspring and the horrible transformations that followed. There were even references to dark web transactions, much like the one I had made. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It all sounded so impossible, and yet it fit perfectly with what was happening to us. One night, I received a private message from a user named Watcher in the Dark. They claimed to have first-hand knowledge of alien interactions and offered to help me. Desperate for answers, I agreed to meet them in a public place, a diner on the outskirts of town. Watcher in the Dark turned out to be a middle-aged woman named Dr. Eleanor Hart, a former government scientist who had gone underground after whistleblowing on secret alien research projects. She looked tired and worn, like she hadn't slept in years. She listened patiently as I told her everything, her expression growing grimmer with each word. "I believe you," she said when I finished. "What you described matches the classified reports I've seen. These creatures, they use humans as hosts. They're highly advanced, and their technology is beyond anything we can comprehend." "Is there a way to stop it?" I asked, my voice shaking. She sighed and looked down at her hands. "There's no cure, no treatment. Once the process starts, it's almost impossible to reverse. The best we can do is try to manage it, keep it from spreading." "What about my sister? Can I save her?" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small vial of liquid. "This is a sedative, strong enough to knock out an elephant. If you can find her, use it. It might give you a chance to extract whatever's inside her." I took the vial, my hands trembling. "What happens after that?" She looked me in the eyes, her expression hard. "You destroy it, completely. And you make sure no one else ever finds out about this. The more people know, the more danger we're all in." I thanked her and left, my mind racing with a mix of fear and determination. I had to find my sister. I had to save her. I spent the next few days searching everywhere. I checked abandoned buildings, the woods, even old friends' houses, but there was no sign of her. Then one night, I heard a noise coming from the shed. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed the vial and a flashlight and ran outside. There she was, lying on the mattress, her skin pale and her eyes glowing faintly. She looked even worse than before, her body gaunt and her movements sluggish. But she was alive. I knelt beside her, my heart breaking at the sight. "Sis, it's me," I whispered, brushing the hair from her face. "I'm here to help you." Her eyes flickered open and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and relief. "It hurts," she said, her voice barely audible. "It's getting stronger." I nodded, trying to hold back tears. "I know, but I have something that might help. I need you to trust me, okay?" She nodded weakly, and I carefully injected the sedative into her arm. Within minutes, she was unconscious. I took a deep breath and prepared to do the unthinkable again. I made the first cut, my hands shaking, but I forced myself to keep going. Blood poured out, and I almost gagged from the smell. But then, I saw it. The creature inside her was different this time, larger and more developed. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, and it thrashed violently as I pulled it free. It was stronger than before, fighting against my grip with a terrifying ferocity. I threw it to the ground and grabbed a heavy wrench, bringing it down with all my strength. The creature let out a high-pitched screech as I crushed its skull, blood and slime splattering everywhere. I turned back to my sister, but she was barely breathing. I wrapped her in blankets and cleaned the wound as best I could, praying that she would survive. I didn't know what else to do. I stayed with her all night, watching over her and waiting for her to wake up. As the sun rose, she finally stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Is it gone?" she asked, her voice weak. I nodded. "It's gone," I said. "You're safe now." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Whatever that thing was, it was just the beginning, and I had no idea what was coming next. The days after the second extraction were a living nightmare. My sister's condition worsened, and the changes in her became more pronounced. She was barely recognizable, her skin translucent, and her eyes hollow. The strange abilities she exhibited grew stronger, and she seemed to be slipping further away from humanity. I was at my wit's end, desperate for a solution. Dr. Hart's warning echoed in my mind. The more people know, the more danger we're all in. But I couldn't handle this alone anymore. I decided to call her, hoping she had some last-ditch advice. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the concern in her voice. "Come to my place," she said. "There's something I haven't told you. We might have one last chance to save her." I bundled my sister into the car and drove to Dr. Hart's remote cabin in the woods. The drive felt endless, my mind racing with thoughts of what awaited us. When we arrived, Dr. Hart ushered us inside quickly, her eyes darting nervously, as if she expected to be watched. Inside, she had an array of strange devices and scientific equipment. "This is our last hope," she said, pointing to a metallic pod in the corner. "It's a containment chamber. It's designed to hold the entity and sever its connection to the host." I looked at my sister, who was barely conscious, and then back at Dr. Hart. "Will it hurt her?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Hart sighed. "There's a risk, but it's the only chance we have." With a heavy heart, I agreed. We placed my sister inside the chamber, and Dr. Hart began the process. The machine hummed to life, and a blue light enveloped my sister. She screamed, the sound echoing through the small cabin, but I forced myself to stay strong. The entity inside her fought back, causing the chamber to shake violently. The room filled with a blinding light, and I shielded my eyes, praying that this would work. Then with a final, ear-piercing scream, it was over. The light faded, and the chamber fell silent. Dr. Hart opened the pod, and we both gasped. My sister was lying still, her skin a healthy color again. The changes in her appearance were gone, and she looked like her old self. I rushed to her side, tears streaming down my face. "She's stable," Dr. Hart said, checking her vitals. It worked. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A loud crash from outside shattered the moment, and we turned to see the cabin surrounded by men in black suits. They burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Get away from her!" one of them shouted, grabbing Dr. Hart and throwing her to the ground. I stood in front of my sister, trying to shield her, but they pulled me away. They restrained us both and started examining the chamber. "We've been tracking this for months," one of them said. "You've interfered with classified government operations." Dr. Hart struggled against her restraints. "You can't take her. She's free now." The leader of the group smirked. "Free? You have no idea what you're dealing with." He nodded to his men, and they lifted my sister, who was still unconscious, onto a stretcher. I fought against the man holding me, but it was no use. "Please, she's just a girl. Let her go." The leader shook his head. "She's not just a girl anymore. She's a key to something much bigger." They dragged us outside, and I watched helplessly as they loaded my sister into a black van. Before I could react, they injected me with something, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a small windowless room. Dr. Hart was beside me, her face bruised but determined. "We have to get out of here," she whispered. "They'll do unspeakable things to her." We waited for the right moment, and when the guards changed shifts, we made our move. Dr. Hart had managed to steal a key card, and we slipped out of the room, moving through the facility as quietly as possible. We found my sister in a laboratory, hooked up to machines, her body writhing in pain. The scientists were performing experiments on her, and the sight made my blood boil. Dr. Hart and I stormed in, taking them by surprise. We fought off the scientists and freed my sister, but the alarm started blaring. "We have to go, now!" Dr. Hart shouted, helping me carry my sister. We raced through the facility, dodging guards and security cameras. Finally, we burst through an emergency exit and into the forest. We ran until we couldn't run anymore, collapsing in exhaustion. In the safety of the woods, I looked at my sister, who was starting to come around. "We're safe now," I whispered, holding her close. Dr. Hart nodded, though her eyes were filled with worry. "For now. But they won't stop looking for her. We need to keep moving." We started a life on the run, constantly looking over our shoulders, never staying in one place for too long. My sister slowly recovered, but the trauma left deep scars. Dr. Hart stayed with us, helping us navigate this new, dangerous world. I don't know what the future holds, but I'll do whatever it takes to protect my sister. We've seen horrors beyond imagination, but we've also found strength we never knew we had. And as long as we're together, we'll keep fighting, because family is worth any sacrifice, no matter how great. And that's the story. I never imagined buying that vial would lead to all this, but I don't regret it. It's a reminder that curiosity can be dangerous, and some secrets are better left uncovered. I bought a baby of the dark web. I received something that is not human. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to do something like this. Honestly, the very thought of even browsing the dark web made me nervous. But desperate times call for desperate measures. My wife and I had been trying for a baby for years with no luck. We spent thousands on fertility treatments, and after multiple miscarriages, it felt like life was playing a cruel joke on us. We were broken. That's when I stumbled across an anonymous post on a forum I frequented. It was simple. Want a baby? Check the dark web. At first, I scoffed. The dark web was for drugs, hitmen, and other twisted things, right? But the more I thought about it, the more the idea burrowed into my mind like a parasite. What if this was our chance? I mean, we had already tried everything else. So, after a couple of nights of insomnia-fueled research, I decided to dive in. Navigating the dark web is like exploring a labyrinth designed by psychopaths. Every corner is filled with something more depraved than the last. After hours of scrolling through forums and shady marketplaces, I found what I was looking for. The post was brief, almost clinical. Babies for adoption, no questions asked, serious inquiries only. I clicked on the link, and it took me to a private chat room. The username was Darkstalk, and their profile picture was a distorted image of a baby doll. My stomach churned, but I pressed on. I initiated a conversation, and within minutes, I was given a set of instructions. Bitcoin only, no personal information, delivery in 1 week. The price was steep, but I transferred the money without hesitation. The transaction was complete, and all I could do now was wait. The next week was agonizing. I was a bundle of nerves jumping at every noise and obsessively checking my email. Then exactly 7 days later, a plain white van pulled up outside my house. My heart pounded as I watched from the window. A man dressed in black stepped out, carrying a small, nondescript cardboard box. He didn't ring the doorbell or knock. He just placed the box on my doorstep and left. I waited until he was out of sight before opening the door. The box was surprisingly light. I brought it inside, my hands shaking. Inside was a baby, or at least that's what I thought at first. It was swaddled in a dirty, blood-stained blanket, and the smell that emanated from it was horrendous, like a mix of rotting meat and something else I couldn't place. I slowly peeled back the blanket, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a baby. It looked like one, sure, but the eyes were all wrong. They were too large and pitch black, like two bottomless pits staring back at me. Its skin was a sickly gray, covered in patches of what looked like mold, and its mouth, oh God, its mouth was filled with sharp, needle-like teeth. It opened its mouth and let out a sound that was somewhere between a hiss and a gurgle. My initial reaction was to throw it away, but something about its eyes held me captive. They seemed to bore into my soul, paralyzing me with fear. I couldn't move, couldn't think. It was like I was under some kind of spell. My wife came into the room, and I quickly covered the thing back up with the blanket. She looked at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What's wrong? What's in the box?" I couldn't tell her. I just couldn't. Instead, I mumbled something about needing to take care of something and hurried out of the room. I hid the box in the basement, locking the door behind me. For the next few days, I tried to go about life as usual, but the memory of those black eyes haunted me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. The smell lingered in the house, no matter how much I cleaned. And then there were the noises. At night, I heard scratching and low growls coming from the basement. My wife started to suspect something was wrong. She asked me repeatedly what was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her. One night, I woke up to find her missing from our bed. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the house. I found her standing outside the basement door, her hand on the doorknob. "What are you doing?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard something. It sounded like a baby crying. I grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the door. "It's nothing. Probably just a raccoon or something. Come back to bed." She looked at me, eyes filled with doubt, but she followed me back upstairs. I knew I couldn't keep this up for much longer. Whatever that thing was, it was getting stronger, and I was running out of excuses. The final straw came a few nights later. I was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. I rushed to the basement, my heart in my throat. The door was wide open, and the box was empty. I followed the sound of the screams to the living room, where I found my wife. She was on the floor, her face twisted in terror, blood pouring from deep gashes on her arms. And there, standing over her, was the creature. It had grown. It was no longer the size of a baby, but more like a toddler, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. It turned to look at me, those black eyes filled with a malevolent intelligence. Before I could react, it lunged at me, its teeth sinking into my arm. The pain was unlike anything I had ever felt. I managed to shake it off, grabbing a nearby lamp and smashing it over the creature's head. It let out a high-pitched screech before scurrying back into the shadows. I grabbed my wife and ran. We drove to the hospital, and I told the doctors we had been attacked by a wild animal. They didn't ask many questions, just patched us up and sent us home. But I knew we couldn't go back. That thing was still in our house, and it was only a matter of time before it came for us again. We checked into a motel, and that's where we are now. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get rid of it. All I know is that I made a terrible mistake, and now we're paying the price. I'm posting this as a warning to anyone who might be as desperate as we were. Don't do it. Don't even think about it, because whatever you get from the dark web, it's not worth the nightmare that follows. We've been holed up in this dingy motel room for 3 days now, and it feels like my sanity is slipping away with each passing hour. My wife Sarah is still in shock. She barely speaks, and when she does, it's in whispers. Her eyes dart around the room like she's expecting that thing to burst through the door at any moment. Honestly, I can't blame her. I feel the same way. I've tried to explain everything to her, but how do you tell someone that the baby you ordered off the dark web turned out to be some kind of demonic entity? She just looks at me with this blank expression, like she can't process what I'm saying. I can't either. I mean, what the hell did I bring into our lives? On the 4th day, I decided we needed to do something. We couldn't just sit here and wait to be found. I went to the local library and spent hours researching anything that might help. Cryptids, demons, dark web horror stories. Nothing seemed to match what we were dealing with. I was starting to lose hope when I found an old, dusty book tucked away in a forgotten corner. It was a book on occult practices and summoning rituals. One passage stood out to me. The dark ones feed on fear and despair. They grow stronger with each victim they claim. I couldn't help but think of the creature's black eyes and the malevolent intelligence behind them. This had to be it. This thing was feeding on us, growing stronger with each passing day. But how do you fight something like that? The book suggested banishing rituals, but they required items and knowledge I didn't have. Still, it was a start. I took the book back to the motel and showed it to Sarah. She looked at me, her eyes hollow, but there was a flicker of hope. "Do you think it could work?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we have to try something," I replied. "We can't stay here forever." We made a plan. The book mentioned that iron and salt could weaken these entities, so we stocked up on as much as we could find. We also bought a couple of cheap cameras to set up around the house. If we were going to face this thing, I wanted to know what we were dealing with. The drive back to the house was nerve-wracking. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made my heart race. When we finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed over us, dark and foreboding. It felt like walking into a nightmare. We cautiously entered, clutching our bags of supplies. The stench hit us immediately, that same sickly sweet smell of decay. I tried not to gag as we moved through the house, spreading salt at the doorways and windows, setting up the cameras. The basement door was still ajar, and a cold draft wafted up from below. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, iron rod in hand. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the weak bulb hanging from the ceiling. I could see the remnants of the box in the corner, but the creature was nowhere in sight. My heart pounded as I crept closer, spreading salt in a wide circle around the box. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me, a soft, wet gurgle. I spun around, iron rod raised, but there was nothing there. My mind was playing tricks on me. I needed to stay focused. I finished the salt circle and retreated upstairs, locking the basement door behind me. Sarah was waiting in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife. She looked at me with wide eyes, her knuckles white from gripping the handle so tightly. "Did you see it?" she asked. "No, but it's down there." "I could feel it," I replied. "We need to stay vigilant. If it comes out, we hit it with the iron and keep it contained in the salt circle." The first night was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the house made us jump, but there was no sign of the creature. It wasn't until the second night that things started to go wrong. We were sitting in the living room, trying to keep each other awake, when we heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the basement. Sarah's eyes widened, and I felt my blood run cold. I grabbed the iron rod and motioned for Sarah to stay back. Slowly, I approached the basement door. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. I could hear that horrible gurgling sound again, and my heart pounded in my chest. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. Just as I was about to open the door, there was a loud crash from behind me. I spun around to see one of the cameras had fallen over, the lens cracked. My attention snapped back to the door, which was now rattling on its hinges. Whatever was down there wanted out, and it wanted out now. I took a deep breath and flung the door open. The creature was there, its black eyes glinting in the dim light. It had grown even more, its limbs elongated and twisted. It lunged at me, and I swung the iron rod with all my might. The rod connected with a sickening thud, and the creature let out a blood-curdling scream. It fell back, writhing in pain, but it wasn't finished. It scrambled towards the salt circle, hissing and spitting. I grabbed a handful of salt and threw it at the creature. It shrieked and recoiled, smoke rising from its skin where the salt had touched it. "Sarah, get the book," I shouted. "We need to do the ritual now." She ran to the table where we had left the book, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. I kept my eyes on the creature, ready to strike again if it moved. It seemed weaker now, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it tried to escape. Sarah began chanting the words from the book, her voice trembling. The creature thrashed and howled, but it couldn't break through the salt circle. I watched in awe as the air around it seemed to shimmer and distort. The creature's form flickered, becoming less solid, less real. But then, just as I thought we were winning, the creature let out a final, ear-piercing scream. The window shattered, and the lights flickered and died. In the darkness, I could hear Sarah's voice falter. "Keep going," I shouted. "Don't stop." But it was too late. The creature lunged at me, its claws sinking into my leg. I screamed in agony, swinging the iron rod wildly. I felt it connect, but the creature's grip tightened. I could feel its cold breath on my face, smell its rancid odor. Then suddenly, it was gone. The air was still, the house silent. I lay on the floor, panting, my leg throbbing with pain. Sarah knelt beside me, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We banished it." But I wasn't so sure. The house felt empty, but there was a lingering sense of dread. I knew we had only bought ourselves some time. That thing was still out there, somewhere, waiting, and it wouldn't rest until it had claimed us both. The relief was short-lived. The momentary silence after the creature vanished felt like the calm before a storm. I knew it was far from over. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain in my leg was becoming unbearable. Sarah helped me to the couch, and we examined the wound. It was deep, the flesh torn and raw. We wrapped it with some gauze we found in the first aid kit, but I knew I needed proper medical attention. "We can't stay here," I said through gritted teeth. "We have to go." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. We grabbed what we could and hurried out of the house. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that those black eyes were watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike again. We went to a nearby urgent care clinic. I lied about the cause of the injury, saying it was an animal attack. The doctor looked skeptical but didn't press the issue. After getting stitched up and given a prescription for antibiotics, we checked into another motel, hoping to figure out our next move. Sarah was trying to stay strong, but I could see the cracks forming. Every little noise made her jump, and she barely slept. I wasn't faring much better. My dreams were plagued with visions of the creature, its black eyes boring into my soul. I woke up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Desperation was setting in. I spent hours on my laptop, searching for anything that could help us. I posted on forums, reaching out to anyone who might have dealt with something similar. Most of the responses were useless. People telling me I was crazy or making up stories. But one message stood out. It was from a user named Exorcist42. "I've seen something like this before. Meet me. I can help." The message was short and cryptic, but I was willing to try anything. We arranged to meet in a public place, a diner on the outskirts of town. Sarah was hesitant, but she agreed to come with me. The man we met was older, with a grizzled beard and tired eyes. He introduced himself as John and got straight to the point. "What you have isn't just a creature, it's a demon, a parasite that feeds on fear and despair. Once it latches onto a host, it won't stop until it's consumed everything." My heart sank. I had hoped for some explanation, some way to fight it, but this sounded like a death sentence. "Is there any way to get rid of it?" I asked, my voice barely steady. John nodded. "There is, but it's not easy. You have to sever its connection to you. That means confronting it, facing your fears head on, and you'll need help. I know a place where we can perform a ritual to banish it for good." Sarah squeezed my hand, and I knew we had no choice. We agreed to meet John the next day and follow him to the location. The place he took us to was an old abandoned church deep in the woods. It looked like it had been untouched for decades, the windows boarded up and the doors barely hanging on their hinges. Inside, it was cold and dark, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. "We need to prepare," John said, setting up candles and drawing symbols on the floor with the chalk. "This ritual is dangerous, and it will try to stop us. Stay inside the circle no matter what." As night fell, The atmosphere grew more oppressive. The shadows seemed to move on their own, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie shapes on the walls. We sat in the center of the circle, holding hands, while John began to chant. At first, nothing happened, but then a low growl echoed through the church, and the temperature dropped. I could see my breath, and Sarah's grip tightened on my hand. The growl grew louder, and the shadows coalesced into a form at the edge of the circle. The creature stood there, its black eyes gleaming with hatred. John continued to chant, his voice growing louder and more urgent. The creature lunged at the circle, but an invisible barrier held it back. It snarled and hissed, its eyes locked on mine. I could feel its anger, its hunger. It wanted us, and it wasn't going to give up easily. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to trust John, trust the ritual. The creature's growls grew louder, and I could hear it moving around us, searching for a way in. "Stay strong," John shouted over the noise. "Don't let it break you." I closed my eyes, focusing on Sarah's hand in mine. We had been through so much together, and I wasn't going to let this thing take us. I thought about all the pain and fear we had endured, all the nights spent wondering if we would ever be free. This was our chance to end it, once and for all. The creature let out a deafening roar, and I felt a surge of energy as John finished the ritual. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive weight that had been suffocating us was lifted. John slumped to the ground, exhausted but smiling. "It's over," he said. "You've done it." Relief washed over me, and I pulled Sarah into a tight embrace. We had faced our worst nightmare and come out the other side. But as we left the church, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly the end. The dark web had brought that thing into our lives, and who knew what else was lurking out there, waiting for someone desperate enough to take the bait. We returned to the motel, exhausted but hopeful. For the first time in weeks, we slept soundly, free from the terror that had haunted us. But deep down, I knew we would never be the same. The scars, both physical and emotional, would always be there, a reminder of the darkness that exists just beneath the surface of our world. I decided to share our story, to warn others of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. If you're reading this, know that there are things out there, things that feed on our deepest fears and darkest desires. And once they find you, they will never let go. Stay away from the dark web. No matter how desperate you are, no matter what you think you need, it's not worth the price. Trust me, some doors are better left unopened. We tried to rebuild our lives after that night in the church. John warned us to stay vigilant, to keep our guard up, but it was hard to shake the feeling that the worst was behind us. We moved to a new town, far away from the house and the memories it held. I found a new job, and Sarah started seeing a therapist to help her cope with the trauma. Things were looking up, or so we thought. The first sign that something was wrong came about a month later. I was at work when Sarah called me, her voice trembling. "I found something in the basement," she said. My heart sank. We had agreed not to use the basement, keeping it locked just in case. I rushed home, dread gnawing at my insides. When I got there, Sarah led me downstairs. In the far corner, where the shadows seemed to cling to the walls, there was a small blood-stained blanket. It was the same one that had come in the box, the one we had burned after that night. My stomach churned, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "How did this get here?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking. "But we need to get rid of it." We took the blanket outside and burned it again, watching as the flames consumed it. But the sense of unease lingered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind, set my nerves on edge. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of scratching. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. The sound was coming from the basement. I grabbed the iron rod I had kept by the bed, just in case, and crept downstairs. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. When I reached the basement door, I paused, listening. It was the same gurgling sound I had heard before. My blood ran cold. I opened the door a crack, peering into the darkness. The scratching stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then something slammed against the door, and I stumbled back, fear gripping my heart. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. I could hear the creature on the other side, its growls and hisses growing louder. I knew it was only a matter of time before it broke through. I ran back upstairs and woke Sarah. "It's back," I said, my voice shaking. "We have to leave." We grabbed what we could and fled the house, driving to a nearby motel. As we checked in, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The motel room was small and dingy, but it felt safer than the house. We barricaded the door and huddled together, trying to figure out our next move. The next morning, I called John. He was surprised to hear from me, but agreed to meet us at a cafe in town. When we told him what had happened, he looked grim. "It's stronger than I thought," he said. "Banishing it wasn't enough. It's still connected to you, feeding on your fear." "What can we do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John hesitated. "There is one more thing we can try, but it's risky. We need to perform a severing ritual, something to break its hold on you completely, but it requires a blood sacrifice." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. A blood sacrifice? It sounded like something out of a horror movie, but we were out of options. "What kind of sacrifice?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Your blood," John replied. "It needs to taste the fear it craves, but be denied its sustenance. It will weaken it enough for the ritual to work." I looked at Sarah, her face pale and frightened. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked. John nodded. "It's our best shot, but you have to be prepared. It will fight back, and it will be vicious." We agreed to meet at an old abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that night. John gave us a list of supplies to gather: candles, salt, iron, and a ceremonial knife. The hours leading up to the ritual were tense. We were both on edge, every little sound setting off our nerves. As night fell, we drove to the warehouse, the sense of dread growing with each passing mile. The place was dark and foreboding, the perfect setting for a horror movie. John was already there, setting up the ritual circle. He looked up as we approached, his expression serious. "Are you ready?" he asked. We nodded, though I wasn't sure I truly was. We entered the circle, and John began the ritual. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to press in on us. I could feel the creature's presence, its malevolent gaze watching us from the darkness. John handed me the ceremonial knife. "You need to cut your palm and let the blood fall into the circle. The creature will come for it, but you must stay strong. Do not let it touch you. I took a deep breath and made the cut, the pain sharp and immediate. Blood dripped onto the floor, and the creature's growls grew louder. It emerged from the shadows, its black eyes locked onto mine. It was bigger now, more monstrous, its limbs twisted and elongated. It lunged at me, and I swung the iron rod, connecting with a sickening crunch. The creature shrieked, but it didn't back down. It clawed at the air, trying to reach the blood. I could feel its hunger, its desperation. John's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The air around us crackled with energy, and the creature howled in rage. It lunged again, and this time its claws raked across my arm. I screamed in pain, but I didn't let go of the rod. "Hold on!" John shouted. "It's almost over." The creature writhed and twisted, its form flickering and distorting. I could feel its grip on me weakening, its power fading. With a final ear-piercing scream, it disintegrated into nothingness, leaving only silence behind. I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and bleeding. Sarah rushed to my side, tears streaming down her face. John finished the ritual, sealing the circle and breaking the connection, once and for all. "It's done," he said, his voice weary. "You're free." We left the warehouse, the weight of the past months lifting off our shoulders. The creature was gone, and we could finally start to heal. But the scars, both physical and emotional, would always be there, a reminder of the darkness we had faced. As we drove away, I couldn't help but think about the dark web and the horrors it held. We had been lucky to survive, but I knew others might not be so fortunate. I made a promise to myself to share our story, to warn others of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. If you're reading this, heed my warning. The dark web is a gateway to things best left unknown. No matter how desperate you are, no matter what you think you need, it's not worth the risk. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Life slowly began to return to normal after the ritual. Sarah and I moved to a new city, far away from the memories of our old house and the nightmare we had lived through. We found a small apartment and focused on rebuilding our lives. Sarah continued therapy, and I found a new job. For a while, it seemed like the nightmare was truly behind us. But trauma has a way of lingering, and I still couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that I could see those black eyes staring at me from the shadows. Sarah had her own struggles, her sleep plagued with nightmares, and her once bright demeanor now shadowed by fear. Then came the night that shattered our fragile peace. It was late, and Sarah had already gone to bed. I was sitting on the couch, trying to lose myself in a book, when I heard a faint noise from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. I put the book down and listened, straining to hear. There it was again, a soft, wet, gurgling sound. I grabbed the iron rod I had kept by the couch ever since that night in the warehouse and crept towards the hallway. The sound grew louder, more insistent. I reached the bedroom door and pushed it open slowly. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Sarah was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. Standing at the foot of the bed was the creature. It was smaller now, but still horrifying. Its black eyes glinted with malevolent glee, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. "How?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The creature let out a low, sinister laugh. It had found us, despite everything we had done to escape. My mind raced. How could it still be here? We had performed the ritual. broken its hold. But then I realized it wasn't just connected to us through fear. It had tasted our blood, our very essence. It had become a part of us. I tightened my grip on the iron rod and stepped into the room. "Sarah, get behind me," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. She scrambled to the edge of the bed, tears streaming down her face. The creature hissed, its eyes flicking between us. It lunged at me, and I swung the rod, but it was too fast. It darted to the side, claws raking across my arm. The pain was immediate and blinding, but I held my ground. "Stay back!" I shouted, swinging the rod again. This time it connected, and the creature let out a high-pitched screech. It staggered back, and I seized the moment to grab Sarah's hand. "We need to get out of here." We ran from the apartment, the creature's screams echoing behind us. We didn't stop until we reached the car. We drove for hours, not knowing where to go, just needing to get as far away as possible. Eventually, we found ourselves at a rest stop on the outskirts of a small town. We were exhausted, our bodies and minds pushed to the limit. As we sat in the car, catching our breath, I turned to Sarah. "We can't keep running. We need to end this once and for all." She nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "But how?" The ritual didn't work. I thought back to everything John had told us, to the books and forums I had scoured. There had to be something we missed, some piece of the puzzle we overlooked. And then it hit me. The connection wasn't just about fear or blood. It was about our very essence, our souls. We needed to sever that bond completely, to destroy the part of us that it had latched onto. I grabbed my phone and did a quick search for exorcists and spiritual healers in the area. We found a small, run-down church a few miles away. It was a long shot, but it was all we had left. We drove there, the dawn just beginning to break over the horizon. The priest who greeted us was old and frail, but his eyes were sharp and full of wisdom. We told him everything, sparing no details. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally. "I have seen something like this before," he said finally. "A demon that feeds on fear and despair, that binds itself to its victims through their very essence. It is rare, but not invincible. You must confront it, face it with your love and your strength. Only then can you break its hold." He led us into the small sanctuary, where he prepared a circle of salt and lit candles around the altar. He gave us each a small vial of holy water and instructed us to hold hands and focus on our love for each other, on the strength we had found in our shared ordeal. The air grew cold and the shadows deepened. I could feel the creature's presence, could hear its gurgling growl. It appeared at the edge of the circle, its eyes burning with hatred. "Now," the priest said, his voice steady, "show it your strength. Show it your love." Sarah and I held hands tightly, our eyes locked onto the creature. "You don't belong here," I said, my voice strong and clear. "You have no power over us." The creature hissed, lunging at the circle, but it was repelled by the salt. Sarah squeezed my hand, her voice steady. "We are stronger than you. You can't break us." We threw the holy water at the creature, and it screamed in agony. Its form began to waver, to distort. I could feel its hold on us weakening, its power fading. The priest continued to chant, his voice rising above the creature's screams. With a final, desperate lunge, the creature shattered into a million pieces, disintegrating into nothingness. The air cleared, and the oppressive weight lifted. We collapsed to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. "It's over," the priest said softly. "You are free." We thanked him, our hearts filled with gratitude. As we left the church, the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm, golden glow. We knew we still had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in months, we felt hopeful. We returned to our apartment, our hearts lighter. The scars were still there, a reminder of the darkness we had faced, but they no longer held us captive. We had faced our worst nightmare and come out stronger. As I sit here writing this, I hope our story serves as a warning. There are things in this world that feed on our fear, that thrive in the shadows. The dark web is a gateway to those horrors, a place where desperation can lead to unimaginable consequences. If you're reading this, please stay away from the dark web. No matter how desperate you are, no matter what you think you need, it's not worth the risk. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Trust me, there are things out there that should never be brought into the light. I downloaded a dark web file. Now my computer won't stop screaming. I should have never gone looking for trouble. It all started when I was browsing through Reddit one boring Friday night, going down rabbit holes I probably shouldn't have. You know, just the usual, looking at weird subreddits, reading creepypastas, and then I found myself in this thread talking about the dark web. Now, I've always been kind of a tech geek, and I knew about the dark web. I knew it was dangerous, filled with all kinds of illegal and messed up stuff. But curiosity got the better of me. People were sharing their craziest dark web experiences, and honestly, most of them sounded like bullshit. I wanted to see for myself if there was any truth to it. So I did what any sane person wouldn't do. I downloaded Tor, got myself some Bitcoin, and dove in. It was everything people said it would be. Drugs, hitmen, illegal porn. But then I found something different. Something I hadn't seen mentioned anywhere. It was a link with no description, just the title, The Screaming File. I clicked it, and it led me to a page with a single download button. Against my better judgment, I downloaded the file. It was a .exe file named scream.x. Stupidly, I double-clicked it without thinking twice. At first, nothing happened. My computer didn't explode. My screen didn't go black. I almost laughed at how anticlimactic it was. Then just as I was about to close my laptop and call it a night, my screen flickered. The flickering got faster, almost like my screen was having a seizure. I tried to move my mouse to close the program, but it was frozen. And then it started. A scream. Not just any scream, but the most blood-curdling, soul-wrenching scream I've ever heard. It was loud, deafening. I ripped my headphones off, but the scream kept going, blasting out of my laptop speakers. It was a woman's scream, raw with agony, like she was being tortured. I panicked, pressing every button on my keyboard, but nothing worked. I tried to force shut down my laptop, but it wouldn't turn off. The scream went on for what felt like hours, but in reality, it was probably just a few minutes. Then as abruptly as it started, it stopped. I sat there in the eerie silence, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare touch my laptop, afraid the screaming would start again. I finally gathered the courage to check the laptop. My screen was back to normal, except for one thing, a new folder on my desktop, labeled Listen. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of audio files, each one named with a date. The most recent one was today's date. I clicked on it, and the scream started again, but this time, it was different. It was slower, more drawn out, and I swear, I could hear words buried deep within the scream, like the woman was trying to say something. I listened closely, straining to make out the words. "I'm here. Help me." I slammed my laptop shut, my mind racing. What the hell had I just stumbled upon? I wanted to believe it was some elaborate prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was real. For the next few days, I couldn't bring myself to open my laptop. I left it sitting there on my desk, a constant reminder of the horror I'd unleashed. I started hearing things at night, whispers, faint screams, like they were coming from my laptop, even though it was shut. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind was unraveling. I finally decided I needed to get rid of it. I packed up my laptop and drove to the nearest electronics store. I told the guy at the counter it was broken and I needed to get rid of it. He looked at me funny, but took it. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I left the store. I thought it was over, but that night, the screaming came back, louder, more desperate. It was coming from my phone now. I checked my email, and there it was. An email with no sender, no subject, just an attachment named "Listen, MP3. I deleted it immediately, but the screaming wouldn't stop. I smashed my phone against the wall, hoping to silence it, but it didn't work. The screams were in my head now, echoing through my mind, driving me insane. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to find out what was happening. I needed to make it stop. That's when I decided to go back on the dark web to find the source of the file, to find out who was behind it, and how to end this nightmare. I know it's a long shot, but it's my only hope. I'll update you guys as soon as I find out more. If you don't hear from me, well, you know why. Don't download anything from the dark web, no matter how curious you are. Trust me, it's not worth it. After a night of no sleep, the screaming still echoing in my mind, I knew I had to get answers. My only option was to go back into the abyss of the dark web and find whoever created that file. I powered up my desktop this time, thinking maybe it was safer than my now broken laptop and phone. I installed Tor again, took a deep breath, and dove back in. Navigating the dark web is like wading through a sea of filth. You come across the worst of humanity, the kind of stuff that makes you lose faith in people. I tried to stay focused, but the screams, even just the memory of them, made my skin crawl. I went back to the same site where I downloaded the file, hoping there might be some clue. The link was still there, just as ominous and cryptic. I clicked it again, and this time, it led me to a different page. There was a message waiting for me. "Welcome back. We've been expecting you." My heart dropped. I had a horrible feeling this wasn't just some random encounter. I clicked around the page, but there was nothing else. No links, no files, just that message. Then another message popped up, this time in real time. "Did you enjoy the scream?" I typed back, my fingers trembling. "Who are you?" There was a pause, then another message. "We are what you fear most." "What do you want from me?" I typed, the panic rising in my chest. "Listen." Another .x file started downloading automatically. I tried to cancel it, but my mouse was frozen again. The file downloaded itself, and before I knew it, it was open. The scream started immediately, but this time it was accompanied by something else. Images flashed on my screen, too fast to make out, but I caught glimpses. Blood, mutilated bodies, a woman's face twisted in agony. I tried to close the program, but it wouldn't let me. The screams got louder, more piercing. I felt like my ears were going to bleed. Then the images slowed down, and I saw her clearly for the first time. The woman from the scream. She was tied to a chair, her eyes wide with terror. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, blood trickling down her face. A message appeared over the video. "Help her." "How?" I typed frantically, the tears streaming down my face. "Find us." The screen went black. The scream stopped. I sat there, staring at the blank monitor, my mind racing. They wanted me to find them, but how? Where? I had no leads, no idea where to even start. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore this. I had to help her. I spent the next few days diving deeper into the dark web, looking for any clue, any trace of these people. I posted in forums, reached out to other users, but no one had any useful information. Most people thought I was crazy. A few offered to help for a price, but they all led to dead ends. Then one night, I got an anonymous message. "I know who you're looking for. Meet me at the address below at midnight. Come alone." I didn't have any other options. I knew it was risky, but I was desperate. I packed a bag, grabbed a flashlight and a knife for protection, and headed out. The address was in a part of town I'd never been to before, run down and abandoned. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. The building was an old warehouse, the kind that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. I crept inside, my heart pounding in my chest. It was dark, the only light coming from my flashlight. I called out, but there was no answer. I was about to turn back when I heard it. The scream. It was faint, coming from deeper inside the building. I followed the sound, my hands shaking. The scream got louder, more desperate. I reached a door and pushed it open. Inside was a small room, empty except for an old TV and a VCR. The TV was on, playing the video of the woman again, her screams echoing through the room. I walked over to the TV, and there was a note taped to it. "Play me," it read. I pressed play on the VCR, and the video started. The woman was there, but this time she wasn't screaming. She was crying, her eyes pleading with the camera. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "You have to help me. They're coming for you too. Get out while you can." The video cut off, and the room plunged into darkness. I turned around, and there they were. 3 figures, standing in the shadows, watching me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. One of them stepped forward, their face hidden by a mask. "We are the Scream," they said. "And now, so are you." They lunged at me, and everything went black. I woke up in complete darkness, my head pounding and my wrists aching. I tried to move, but my arms were bound tightly behind me. Panic surged through me as I realized I was tied to a chair, much like the woman in the video. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic. Blood. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. Silence. The darkness pressed in around me, suffocating. I struggled against the ropes, but they only cut deeper into my skin. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, and a sliver of light pierced the darkness. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor, slow and deliberate. The fear tightened in my chest as a figure emerged from the shadows, their face still hidden by a mask. "Welcome back," the masked figure said, their voice cold and emotionless. "You're awake." "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" "We already told you," they replied. "We are the Scream, and now, so are you." I felt a chill run down my spine. The figure walked around me, inspecting me like I was a piece of meat. They stopped in front of me, their masked face inches from mine. "We know you've been looking for answers," they said. "You should have listened to the warning." "What do you want?" I asked again, desperation creeping into my voice. "Your fear," they said simply. "Your pain. It feeds us. And now, you will join the others." They stepped back, and another figure came forward, holding a syringe. I tried to pull away, but the ropes held me fast. The needle plunged into my arm, and a cold numbness spread through my veins. The darkness closed in again, and I slipped into unconsciousness. When I woke up, I was in a different room, still tied to the chair. This room was brightly lit, the harsh fluorescent lights blinding me. My head throbbed, and I felt a sickening dizziness. I tried to focus, but everything was a blur. The woman from the video was there, standing in front of me. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. "They're watching," she whispered. "They always watch." "What do they want?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. "Entertainment," she replied. "They thrive on our fear, our suffering. They record everything, and they broadcast it to others like them." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some sick game. It was a show, a spectacle for others to enjoy. I was part of their twisted entertainment now. "How do I get out?" I asked, my voice breaking. "There is no way out," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We're trapped. They control everything. The only way to escape is to become like them." "I won't," I said, determination hardening my voice. "I won't become one of them." She looked at me with sad eyes. "They will break you. They break everyone." The door opened again, and the masked figures entered, carrying equipment. They set up cameras around the room, their lenses trained on me. The woman backed away, fear etched on her face. "Let the show begin," one of the figures said, their voice filled with anticipation. They approached me, holding instruments of torture. The first cut was shallow, a teasing taste of the pain to come. The cameras whirred, capturing every moment, every scream. The pain was excruciating, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking me. Hours turned into days. The torture was relentless, but I held on, fueled by a desperate hope that someone, anyone, would find me and end this nightmare. The woman's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of my predicament. One night, when the torture stopped, I was left alone in the room. The cameras were still on, watching my every move. I knew I had to act fast. I managed to loosen the ropes around my wrists, the pain in my arms barely registering anymore. With a surge of adrenaline, I freed myself and crept towards the door. I peered out, seeing the corridor empty. I moved quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no plan, just the desperate need to escape. I found myself in a maze of hallways, each one looking the same. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I finally reached a door that led outside. The cold night air hit me like a slap, and I ran, not looking back. I didn't stop running until I reached a small town miles away. I collapsed at a gas station, begging the attendant to call the police. They arrived, and I told them everything. They looked at me with skepticism, but they took me to the hospital. I spent weeks recovering, both physically and mentally. The police investigated, but they found nothing. The warehouse was empty, no trace of the torture room or the masked figures. It was like it never happened, but I know it did. The screams still haunt me, a constant reminder of what I went through, and sometimes, late at night, I hear them again. not from my phone or my computer, but deep inside my mind. I've moved to a different city, changed my name, trying to escape the past, but I know they're still out there, watching, waiting for the next victim. And I know one thing for sure: I'll never be the same again. Months passed, and while I tried to move on, the memories clung to me like a second skin. Every shadow seemed to hide a masked figure. Every unexpected sound made my heart race. I tried therapy, medication, anything to dull the constant fear, but nothing worked. The screams were always there, a phantom chorus in the back of my mind. I had moved to a small town in the middle of nowhere, hoping the isolation would help me find some semblance of peace, but the quiet only made the memories louder. I rarely left my house, only venturing out for essentials. Even then, I felt like eyes were always on me, watching, waiting. One night, I was sitting in my living room, trying to distract myself with a mindless TV show, when my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to answer, but a morbid curiosity made me pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling. "You can't escape us," a distorted voice replied. The call disconnected before I could respond. I sat there, my phone still in my hand, the fear creeping back into my veins. They had found me. I didn't know how, but they had. I turned off my phone and tried to focus on the TV, but it was no use. The paranoia was back, stronger than ever. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. Every knock on the door, every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I knew they were coming for me. It was only a matter of time. One evening, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank, and the body of the email contained a single link. Against my better judgment, I clicked it. The page that opened was a live stream. The video was grainy and dark, but I could make out a room, the same room where I had been tortured. The camera was focused on a chair in the center, empty for now. A chat box appeared on the side of the screen, messages scrolling by faster than I could read. My heart pounded as I realized what I was looking at. It was a live stream for the same kind of sick show I had been a part of. I quickly closed the window, my hands shaking. I thought about going to the police again, but I knew it would be useless. They hadn't believed me before, and they wouldn't believe me now. I was on my own. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom, pushing furniture against the door. I sat there in the dark, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for them to come. Hours passed, and the silence was deafening. Just when I thought I might be safe, I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It was the same voice from the screams, the woman pleading for help. My mind was unraveling, the lines between reality and nightmare blurring. "Get out," the voice said, clear as day. "They're here." I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my car keys and ran out of the house, not bothering to look back. I drove aimlessly, my mind racing, until I found myself at a motel on the outskirts of the town. I checked in, paying cash, and collapsed on the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking me. But sleep didn't bring relief. My dreams were filled with the same horrors, the masked figures, the woman's screams. I woke up drenched in sweat, the motel room's cheap clock reading 3:33 a.m. I sat up trying to shake off the lingering terror when I heard a knock on the door. My blood ran cold. I got up slowly, the knife still in my hand, and approached the door. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice barely a whisper. There was no answer, just another knock, louder this time. I took a deep breath and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. They were toying with me, trying to break me. I needed to get out of there, but where could I go? They would find me, no matter where I ran. Then my phone buzzed. I had turned it off, but now it was on again, a message on the screen. "You can't run from us." It was accompanied by a live stream link. I felt a mix of rage and fear. They were taunting me, daring me to watch. I clicked the link, the screen filling with the same room, but this time it wasn't empty. The woman was there, tied to the chair, her face a mask of terror. "Please," she whispered, her eyes locking onto the camera. "Help me." I was paralyzed, torn between the need to help and the overwhelming fear that it was a trap. But as I watched, something changed in her eyes. She was looking at something behind the camera, her terror intensifying. Before I could react, the motel room door burst open, and they were there. The masked figures, just as I remembered them. They grabbed me, the knife slipping from my grasp. The last thing I saw before they dragged me away was the live stream, the woman's face frozen in a silent scream. I was back in the nightmare, and this time there was no escape. When I regained consciousness, I was back in that hellish room, tied to the same chair. The harsh fluorescent lights burned my eyes, and the familiar, nauseating smell of blood filled the air. The woman was gone, but the masked figures surrounded me, their cold eyes watching my every move. "Welcome back," one of them said, their voice dripping with mockery. "Why are you doing this?" I pleaded, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" "We told you," another masked figure replied. "Your fear, your pain, it sustains us, and now you will entertain the others." They turned on the cameras, the red lights blinking to life, signaling that the broadcast had begun. The room was filled with a sinister silence, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I knew what was coming, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The torture started slowly, each cut and burn meticulously inflicted to maximize my suffering. They didn't just want my pain, they wanted to break my spirit, to make me beg for mercy in front of their audience. But I refused to give them the satisfaction. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost all meaning in that room. The pain was relentless, but what hurt more was the hopelessness, the realization that there was no escape, no end to this nightmare. Then, in a moment of clarity amidst the agony, I heard her voice again, the woman. "You can fight them," she whispered, her voice cutting through the darkness. "Don't let them win." The masked figures didn't seem to hear her, their focus entirely on my suffering. I clung to her words, using them as a lifeline. I couldn't let them break me. I had to find a way to fight back. During a brief lull in the torture, one of the masked figures stepped out, leaving the room for a moment. I seized the opportunity, my mind racing. The ropes around my wrists were tight, but the blood and sweat had made them slippery. I twisted and pulled, ignoring the pain as the ropes cut into my skin. Finally, with a last desperate tug, my right hand came free. I kept still, hiding my freed hand behind my back as the figure returned, oblivious to my escape attempt. They resumed their cruel work, their attention focused on inflicting as much pain as possible. I waited, biding my time until I saw my chance. When one of the figures leaned in close, I struck. My freed hand shot out, grabbing their mask and yanking it off. The face beneath was ordinary, almost painfully so, but the shock on their face gave me the opening I needed. I lashed out, knocking the figure to the ground and grabbing their dropped knife. The other figures reacted too slowly, their surprise giving me the advantage. I cut through the remaining ropes and lunged at the nearest figure, the knife finding its mark. Chaos erupted in the room. The remaining figures tried to subdue me, but I fought with a ferocity born of desperation. I didn't know if I could win, but I would go down fighting. In the midst of the struggle, I heard a voice, not the woman's, but my own, shouting in rage and defiance. The masked figures faltered, their confidence shaken by my unexpected resistance. I took advantage of their hesitation, pushing my way towards the door. I burst out of the room and into the maze of hallways. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away. The building was a labyrinth, but I followed the faint sounds of traffic, hoping they would lead me to an exit. Finally, I found a door that led outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the side of a deserted road. I lay there gasping for breath, the pain from my wounds a distant echo. A car pulled up beside me, and a man got out, his face full of concern. "Are you okay?" he asked, but I couldn't answer. I passed out, my body finally giving in to exhaustion. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the horrors I had endured. The police were there, waiting to take my statement. I told them everything, sparing no detail. They listened, their skepticism slowly turning to belief as I showed them my wounds, the proof of my ordeal. An investigation was launched, but the building was empty when they arrived, the masked figures gone without a trace. The torture room had been cleaned out, leaving no evidence behind. It was as if they had never been there. The woman's voice still haunted me, her plea for help a constant reminder of the others who hadn't been as lucky. I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting for their next victim, but I also knew I had to keep fighting, to warn others about the dangers lurking in the dark corners of the web. I moved again, to a place even more remote, hoping to find some peace. The nightmares still come, but I face them with a newfound strength. I survived the scream, and I will continue to fight, not just for myself, but for those who are still trapped in the darkness. If you're reading this, heed my warning. Stay away from the dark web. The horrors you'll find there are real, and they will consume you. Don't make the same mistake I did. And if you ever hear the scream, run. Run and don't look back.